So when you're first starting off learning how to code, I think one thing that a lot of YouTubers don't really talk about is the ability to actually navigate code bases and read through the code. Reading the code is probably one of the most important skills that you learn over the years of trying to become a software engineer, that and debugging. So it's not always about writing code. I think what a lot of people think is that when they get hired, they're going to join a greenfield project and they're going to spin up a new Next.js application or a new Vite application and build it from the ground up. But if we're being completely realistic, you are not going to get hired for a brand new project. You're probably going to get put on a project that's legacy. It's been sitting there for a while. It has hundreds of thousands of lines of code potentially. And your first goal as a beginner is to learn how to dive into this code base and add features that are being requested by your project manager or your product owner, debug bugs that are in the backlog, and just understanding the code base, which you obviously will not get exposure to and understand how to do unless you like open up a giant open source library and try to dive through that code base, or you expose yourself to just like medium-sized projects and try to understand them. So with that being said, I'll try to give you some tips and tricks of things that I have learned over the years about how to like dive into a code base and start being productive. So I'm going to share the code base for Site Sensei. This code isn't public, so just take the tips that I'm giving you and put them in the back of your head. So when you first load up a project, typically you need to understand like what framework or libraries they're using. So if they're using Django, there's a particular pattern that all Django applications kind of follow. And the first thing you should probably do is go read the documentation, understand the file structure, and then understand some of the key files that help configure the application. In this example, we have a TanStack start application, right? So it also has a very particular structure. It has a file-based router. So understanding the core mechanisms of the framework is probably the first thing you should do. For example, TanStack start uses a TanStack router, and all the routes are in this routes folder. And I'll say this is a very, very small project. Although it does seem like it has a lot of files in different places, this is like a teeny project. I've been on a project that's almost 500,000 lines of code and you have like thousands of TypeScript files. Onboarding onto a project like that is very complicated because there's just like so much functionality, so many pages, so many dashboards. So I'd say the bigger the project, the less you can just sit there and like spend time trying to go through the code base and understand it. You need to get the high level overview of like what type of state management library are they using? Are they using Zustan? Are they using Redux? Maybe they're just using like state and use effect or like custom hooks, right? Understanding the core patterns of the code base helps you jump into the code base faster. So again, learn the frameworks, learn the libraries that are being used. And if you don't really understand how these things kind of operate or the mechanisms for these, spend time reading through the documentation and learn it. So the second thing that can help you understand a code base is hopefully the code base has documentation about the high level overview of how stuff kind of works. But honestly, I would say just grab a story, like a feature that someone once added, and just work towards understanding it, and then finding the pieces of code that are relevant to implement that feature or fix that bug. Using this project as an example, let's say your product owner says, hey, there's a bug when people try to use a widget to chat with the AI agents where like the widget no longer shows the results. So a bug with that description, you need to first understand, okay, like where in the code base is the widget? And then you can like write this stuff down so you have like a better understanding of where it is. So first of all, you could probably just search the code base for widget. If your developers name stuff properly, if you search the name, it should probably pop up. So there's a widget HTML here and there's a widget JavaScript. Okay. And now you have a ton of code that if you're a beginner, a lot of this stuff might be kind of overwhelming, right? So you may not know where the bug is. You know that there's a client-side widget. Maybe you can reach out to other developers on your team and kind of ask them for like a starting point. In this day and age, we have AI agents. So you can actually ask AI and say, hey, I've been asked to fix a widget. Can you let me know all the places in the code base that might deal with the client-side widget? So let's just pretend like I got a story to fix a bug. My product owner gave me a bug to try to fix an issue with the client-side widget. They're saying that stuff is just not showing up after users ask questions. Can you let me know which files might be relevant to help fix this bug? Now, if you're not using AI, you kind of have to rely on documentation or rely on other people on your team to help guide you, or you could just try to dive through the code base and hope you find what you need. But I would always recommend find the entry point of whatever you're trying to solve. If you're trying to solve a bug on, for example, this URL, I would probably start with loading up the page or the route that's responsible for this URL. Okay, and just to show you, like I could go over here. If you like using the tree browser, you can go to routes, you can go to dashboard, you can go to site ID, and then you could probably, okay, this one looks relevant. So pages, and then one of these two probably would be related to a bug if there was a bug reported on this page. So like I'm saying, like you don't need to know the entire code base to start fixing bugs. Usually code is split up in a way that's very modular and decoupled. So like if you just have a bug on this page, you probably just need to load up one of these 2 pages and then start diving through that code base. But let's go back to the widget example because I think we should stay focused and not jump to another topic. So again, if the bug was to fix the widget, if you use AI, it could give you some starting locations. It says here public widget might be one. It says public widget HTML. It also says, there's API endpoints that are related to this widget. So we could probably load up that file. And again, if they said when a user tries to send a new chat message, it would make sense to try to figure out in the client side where that logic is happening. Let's try to pseudo debug this issue, right? We know that the widget shows up on the screen. So this widget.html, you can assume that, okay, this seems like it's pretty good because when someone goes to the widget, for example, if I go to localhost and go to /widget, I know that the widget shows up, okay? This thing is working fine, which means I could probably cross that off. I don't care about that file anymore. I'm going to assume that it works fine. Secondly, I know that it's not really the styles. The bug is not style related. So this huge chunk of styles and whatnot, like you don't care about it. So let's just go ahead and minimize it. And now you have a little bit less code to even have to look through. And let's say you don't even know JavaScript. Let's say you don't know vanilla JavaScript. You don't even know how to write like event listeners. It doesn't matter. You can still try to debug this from a top level. Let's just go ahead and click on the send button. So I would first probably think, okay, well, something has to be binding to this button to submit it. And if I don't see an on-click listener on this, then there's probably some type of selector in this code base. Okay, here's a selector. And we have a submit button. Again, there's tons of code in this file, but you don't care about it because you're just trying to fix a very, very isolated bug. So let's find where that submit button was because I've already lost it. Here it is. And right below it, turns out there's an on event listener click. So when someone clicks on this button, something happens. It looks like it calls a send chat message. So let's dive into that code. Okay, so now that you found the code that's related to actually sending the message, we can kind of look through here and like read through the code. Okay, just to kind of simulate the bug, I kind of just put a fake bug in this code just to kind of have a talking point. What type of pizza do you sell? Let's just go ahead and submit that. And it says, sorry, there was an error sending your message. Please try again. Okay, so let's just assume that that's like the bug that the product owner is trying to get you to fix. Let's go over here and try to understand the code a little bit. Now, one thing that you will learn over the years when you start getting more and more familiar with reading code is you have to get really good at just scanning through code and trying to find the keywords or the key parts of the code. Because if you're a beginner, you're looking at all this code and it's kind of overwhelming, right? This looks like a lot of code. It's kind of scary. Your eyes start going crisscross just trying to understand it. But most functions, basically, you can kind of break them down into like a bullet point list in your head to understand the flow. Like every function has some type of flow. And if you wanted to, again, let's say that you're just not good at reading code yet. Like this code just seems overwhelming. What you could do is I could say, please generate a mermaid graph of this code so I can understand the flow. And I'm going to go ahead and just paste in that code and I'll click ask. So this will generate a mermaid graph for me, right? It makes a flow chart. And I'm going to go ahead and copy it. It looks like there's a little bug with this. Let me see if I can repair it with AI or if I have to like upgrade to a premium membership. So now we have that whole function and it's generated in a nice, easier to understand flow chart. For a beginner, this can be invaluable. So if the one thing you take away from this video, learn how to use AI and generate charts so you can take those charts and like visualize them, because I think this is very important. So now let's like kind of understand the code without even needing to read the code, right? When you're more advanced, reading this is simple, right? You can just kind of visualize this stuff in your head with the branching and the conditional logic and the key parts. Like here's adding message to a chat. Here's where it kind of mixes a message and it appends it to the DOM. Here where it actually makes the backend request to an endpoint. But again, like having something to help walk you through the code could be useful. So let's read this. User clicks send button. Is the input non-empty? Do nothing, otherwise call send chat message. Then we also check if the chat message is in local storage. It looks like if no, we go ahead and throw an error. I guess there's something that needs to be in local storage for this chat session widget to even work. And then yes, we can go ahead and just show a loader. This is kind of like where it takes the message that you typed and it, injects it into the DOM. So that's how that's happening, adding a thinking indicator to the UI. I guess that's here where it says thinking div. Now, again, this code could probably be refactored and be a little bit easier to read if I went back and actually like spent time refactoring this. But as like a mid-engineer or a senior, like you can kind of just read through this and okay, there's a thinking div. Okay, we have the message. It looks like we're just basically pushing in the message here. So then it looks like here we basically try to do a fetch request to an endpoint. There's an error, we throw an error, and then it looks like we don't do anything with this message, but there is a little comment here. It says we do not remove the thinking indicator here anymore because it will be removed when the polling receives a new message. Okay, so this comment could help you understand the code a little bit more. There's some type of polling mechanism, which is fetching data from the backend at some interval. So it looks like over here, polling will remove the thinking indicator and show assistant reply. But then down here it says set loading equal to false. Now at this point, I know where the error is because this is not the right endpoint, right? Because I wrote this code. So looking over here, I mean, you could try to go back and debug this. Let's go back to the code. And then of course, having your network tab open is probably a good idea. Let's go to the network tab. I'm gonna go ahead and say, what pizza do you sell? I'm gonna go ahead and just click send. And we got an endpoint over here. We're getting a CORS error, a 404. So that leads me to believe that when I actually click on this button and it submits the message to the backend, we're probably hitting the wrong endpoint. And it turns out that this is not the right path to submit that message, right? If you go back to the API, which you should probably do as well, read through the API code, understand your HTTP endpoints, you are trying to hit an endpoint called chat messages, and we call it message. So that's the issue. I forgot to put an S there. Let's save the file. And let's be honest, how many times has forgetting an S screwed you over when you're trying to implement and debug some stuff? Let's refresh because this doesn't live reload. So what type of pizza do you sell? It says sorry, but we did not find any related information to that topic. So it seems like this is working now, but for some reason, like there's no data coming back. So like, again, the more you understand the code, maybe you'll understand that, hey, maybe there's like a widget here. And we're using the wrong site ID. Like we had the wrong site ID to actually test this out. Let's refresh it again and let's say, what type of pizza do you sell? We should have gotten back some type of information. And now with the correct site ID, it's going to hit the correct endpoint and the right data when we get that back. Okay. And now that I think about it, I'm glad I made this video because I think that's a real bug with the widget. I think it should have actually said like you have an invalid site ID set because I don't think that was a real site ID on my program. So I have to go through there and fix that. But anyway, I guess I just wanted to kind of walk you through how you can still somewhat be productive in a code base you don't understand. And it really boils down to trying to find the entry point to whatever you've been asked to implement, fix, or remove. And that typically involves, if you're doing web development, finding the route, finding the file that's related to hosting that route. And then once you dive into that route, you can then find whatever information or components are loaded in to make that route kind of work, right? So for example, if I go to page, you can kind of read through this. It looks like it's just kind of doing some queries. And then you can load up the file and kind of start reading through it and try to understand it. In this day and age, we have this amazing thing called AI. So you're not doing stuff like I just demoed. Like, I don't know how else to help you. Like, you're a lost cause. You should be using AI to help you understand your code base, especially if you're more of a beginner. Like, honestly, don't sleep on the ask feature. Like, you should be asking your code base questions if you're lost or confused or anything. And that should be like your second line of defense. If you're stuck, you're wasting more than 5 minutes trying to understand something, ask chat about it. Try to understand, let AI walk you through it because you're not as smart as you think you might be. At least that's what I say to myself. I'm not as smart as I think I should be, so I should just let AI kind of help me be more productive. Okay, I know I talk a lot and I ramble a lot, but I'm hoping there's some good information that I'm kind of delivering to you all if you're still watching this video. And the very last thing is, how do you get good at just like parsing through code and understanding it? Because as a beginner, like I mentioned, this is a lot of code. This is kind of overwhelming. Like, you don't want to have to understand all this code. And typically you don't need to understand all the code. Depending on what you're trying to do, you again just need to find the small components that are related to what you're debugging and work your way back up the stack or work your way back up the code base. Because typically every bug that I've encountered in my career, assuming that it's not some asynchronous, eventually consistent database bug that you're trying to resolve or some like weird bug that you cannot replicate, usually it's related to someone clicks a button and you have to go and fix the issue related to clicking that button. Or it's an issue related to when the component first loads or the page loads, something's wrong with the data that's being fetched back. Maybe there's like a one-off scenario where the UI breaks because the backend returns something wrong. And so getting good at breaking down a component into like, what are all the interactable things, button clicks, scroll events, onload events, stuff like that. And then being able to quickly find that in the code base. Let me give you another example. Let's say I click on this page and your product owner, your boss is saying, hey, like this stuff looks pretty bad. Can you like not have it be so squeezed together or add a bit of gap between here? Again, how would I as a developer debug this? Well, I go and find the page that's related. So let's go here. Looks like this one, pages and the page ID, is probably what the one we want. And then I need to find some place over here that has this widget. How do I find this widget? I like to just grab some code that I think will be a constant, such as index status. And then let's just do a Command F and find it. Oh, look at that. We found the actual card that's related to that index status. So now what I do is I'd probably just collapse this and just double check. I'm going to comment this out and make sure that the thing goes away. We are in the right place. So we know that the bug, the styling issue, is related to here, which means that the div here probably needs to be, just given a little bit of gap. So I'm going to go ahead and say gap of 8. And now look at that. We've given some gaps to this stuff. Also, the index status complete. It's kind of, it needs a little bit more spacing. So here I could probably actually say, give this a 5, give this a 2. And save that, and this looks a little better now. Here's another example. Let's say there's an issue with this button here. If you click it, it's supposed to do something and then show a toast, right? So how would I find in the code base where this thing is related? I could do a Command-Shift-F and search the whole code base, and there you go. You're right to it. You found the button that's related. You have an on-click listener. Let's look at this. This one calls a reindex page button. You can do a Command F12. That'll open up a panel here, which looks like it calls a mutation. Let's go to the backend code. Here we go. We have a backend mutation. It looks like it's running a query. It's doing some validation checks to make sure you're an admin. And then it runs a scheduler to basically do some more code. If you click on this, now we can dive into this code and understand what this is doing when you try to actually re-index a page. And again, if you don't understand the code, because, if you're a beginner, sometimes reading through code can be a little bit overwhelming. I could just say, generate me a mermaid syntax for this. Go ahead and copy that. Go ahead and paste this in. I need to fix it because for some reason cursor keeps generating some bad mermaid diagram. All right, and now we can actually view a flowchart of that thing, what happens when I try to re-index a page. You can kind of scroll through this. Again, I'm not going to walk you through, but I just want you to have more understanding of like how you can be more productive as an engineer, okay? How you can help yourself understand what you're doing. Because I know when I was beginning, sometimes I get a feature request or a bug request, and I would work with people who literally could just like dive through the code and understand all of it. And this was back when I was using CoffeeScript. So you didn't get good type safety. You didn't get TypeScript support. It was crazy. Like I'd watch people be able to dive through code bases and just like understand everything versus me. I was just sitting there like confused because I'm like, dude, how do you even know how to like change this stuff? But then over the years, you get better at understanding code and reading through code. And like, for example, I could probably read through this and just kind of get a glimpse of what this is doing, right? I'm getting the existing page, making sure it exists. And then I go ahead and set the status as crawling. And then over here, it looks like we're trying to fetch the data from the remote URL. We get some markdown. It looks like we then create the embeddings from this. And then we go ahead and track the usage because we want to make sure that when people are chatting with AI, they're not using too many tokens. They're not spending a bunch of money. So, okay, I guess that's where that logic is happening. You keep going through. Looks like we're changing the crawl status back to completed. And then we also update the page content to store the embeddings and the markdown, the HTML we just crawled from that page. Okay, so you see how when you become more experienced, you can just kind of glance through the code and really understand what's going on. But as a beginner, like this is overwhelming. You may have no idea what this stuff is doing because your eyes are getting too focused on stuff that doesn't matter. The things that matter in this example is existing page and get page by URL. Okay, so right there, those two words, I understand what this block is doing. I don't have to read this stuff. I don't have to read this stuff. I don't have to read like anything. I don't have to care about the await, the const. I know that this one and this one give me enough information to know what's going on. And then I know that this is probably doing something. Okay, if there is no page, it looks like we create a page. Okay, and then we update the page and set something to crawling. And then we basically get the URL and fetch to get the response, the HTML. It looks like we're converting the HTML to Markdown. Okay, again, when you get good, your eyes get much better at just scanning keywords that help describe what the code's doing. And you could also add comments, right? You can add a comment before all these different parts to truly understand what's going on if that helps. You could probably abstract all these things into separate functions and then call those functions that are named really good. But I have found that it just ends up making the code even more annoying because you have to then jump back and forth between these functions and like you keep going up and down your code editor and stuff like that just to understand what's going on, right? So yeah, I mean, you could add comments if they help you. Like I don't want to say don't add comments. I typically don't really add comments to my code. The only reason there's comments here is because I let AI kind of generate some of this stuff. Because for example, this comment is completely worthless to me. Track embedding usage. How does this help me when I can just say, okay, what is this doing? It's calling a function called track usage. You can get good at just understanding like what are the main functions that are being called and what are the variables that we're storing the information into. Like what do they do? Even this is badly named. I could say embeddings response. That would be a much better name for this. And then it makes the code a little bit cleaner and easier to understand. Anyway, that was a lot of stuff. I'm sorry if that was overwhelming and I feel like I kind of rambled for a little bit longer. Maybe I'll make another video in the future and I'll condense this to like a 10-minute video. Anyway, have a good day. Happy coding.